right, here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Non-Victim Nation podcast. Today I am here with Frank Milstead, who is retired from the DPS and is now currently running for Sheriff of Maricopa County. So welcome to the show. Glad
Thanks.
you're
Thanks
here.
for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the setup. It's very homey. This is good.
Thank you. So just recently I had Heston Silbert on and had an excellent conversation about his experience and his time in law enforcement and kind of the changes and things that he had seen. And he introduced me to you. So I was kind of hoping to do a little bit of that same sort of thing, like how things were when you were in DPS and how you see them now.
Okay.
And then kind of like the things you hope to accomplish, like when you become sheriff.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. Heston's one of my best friends. We met uh, at Phoenix PD. We both worked there for the first part of our career. I think he spent 20 or 21 years there. I spent 25, and uh, I started as a neophyte police officer working out on the west side of Phoenix in 1985, and I still think it was kind of uh, the zenith of policing. People respected the police. All you had to do is tell people not to do stuff, and they said, "Yeah, sorry, I won't do it." And now there's this inversion of policing where the bad guys are responsible for nothing, and the cops are responsible for everything. And
Right.
I don't know how we got there, but I think when we were young police officers, in working in West Phoenix or South Phoenix, I think we had a lot more fun doing policing back then.
Right. So I remember being a kid and like when I was a kid, there were certain things that everybody wanted to be when they grew up. They wanted to be a firefighter, they wanted to be a policeman, they wanted to be a cowboy, they wanted to be an astronaut. Those were like kind of the major things that people
Right.
thought of as like it's a great thing to do.
Right.
And just like you, I don't know exactly where that shift came and where the police stopped being good guys and started being the bad guys.
Well, it's interesting. Part of it is when we started videotaping everything,
Hmm.
and the body camera, some thought would be the panacea to all things policing, and I think it's a great tool, and I think if police officers use the camera correctly, they use it in their favor. And I explain that a little more, but I think it keeps them from having problems with
Hmm.
perception of what they're doing.
Right.
But part of that is, as a police officer, you see things and notice things or intuitively understand what's going on because you're standing there.
Right.
And I think if you have that opportunity with the camera going to explain what you're seeing or to articulate what you want people to or to not do,
Hmm.
so the layman who isn't there, who doesn't understand the consequences of what's about to happen, at least understand what you're looking at. But I think when we started publishing, videos of police officers doing things that were outside of the norm,
Hmm.
I think it gave the radical protesters and the liberal media a way to villainize the police, and
Hmm.
I still think they do it. I think that they do it at every chance they get to try to say, look, here's something somebody did wrong. Well, people do stuff wrong in every profession.
Hmm.
I one of my favorite analogies is that medical doctors, surgeons accidentally kill like 250,000 people a year because they leave things inside of you and cut things they shouldn't cut.
Right.
And nobody says, hey, those guys should wear body cameras
Right.
because they probably quit doing surgery if they had to wear a camera. And police officers, eh, you are never going to have a violent encounter with a police officer unless you are a violent criminal. And it's just
Hmm.
that simple. If you don't do stupid things and make bad choices and can commit violent acts upon others,
Hmm.
you're never going to have a violent encounter with a cop. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Um, so kind of going back to the filming thing, the very first instance that I can really think of was well, the LA riots. Was the guy
Oh, you're thinking of now you're going to make me not think of it. Um, the one that they beat with the nightstick.
Rodney King?
Rodney King. There you go.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that that was sort of a turning point about the perception of the police. That certainly was a negative one
Sure.
because of all of that. And I think that ever since then, because we have the technology now to make it more available for people to see what's going on, and just like the news is capable of telling you all kinds of things, but what they really tell you is all the bad stuff. and they save the 5 minutes at the end to tell you something good, right? Because they know that people are going to pay way more attention to all the negative stuff than the other things. So I think that that has a lot to do with how so much of that perception has changed.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And again, another thing to think about. So one of the companies that I represent as a consultant right now is a company called Dino Public Safety, and they do machine learning, AI review of body camera videos, so humans don't have to do it. They do redaction services, take out faces, names, nudity, social security numbers, dates of birth. They do that as a service, so you don't have to do it manually. But long story short is when we met with Phoenix PD about using Dino, right now, Phoenix PD is producing about 7,000 body camera videos a day.
Mhm.
They have a mandate from the Department of Justice not to delete any videos. So they have literally hundreds of thousands, million videos that they're paying storage for. And I always tell people, I said, look, you see at a Phoenix cop doing something questionable, and I won't even say something wrong because there's times when I watch the video and I completely understand it as a cop.
Mhm.
The news anchor may want to be making a big deal out of it because they're not a cop and they're not a public safety fan, but whatever it is. But just imagine if you're producing 7,000 a day, that equates to hundreds of thousands a year, but you see one or two, maybe three videos a year that the
Mhm.
news puts on. Well, if Phoenix PD police officers were doing bad things every day,
Right.
they would do nothing but have a streaming channel of badphoenixcops.com. I
Right.
mean, it would be out there all the time, but it's not the case because if they were doing things that were, if there was systemic racism or there was systemic violence at Phoenix PD, the lawyers, the victims, the ACLU, the Department of Justice, they'd be all pulling those videos and showing them every day. But it
Right.
doesn't happen because the men and women of law enforcement in general, the 99% of us are providing world class police service every
Mhm.
day. And I truly believe that. And poor police service, uh, poor interaction with the community is normally nothing that you're going to see in a major police department or a major county sheriff's department. And if you do see it, it's usually not the department. It's something that happened with a particular person. Maybe it's a squad. Maybe it's a division that because really at the end of the day, culture is what drives good police service. It's
Mhm.
not policy. It's not even really public opinion. Although as a leader of a police agency, that public opinion is paramount to the success because without
Right.
public opinion, you don't get voters, you don't get good jurors, you don't get good support for what we're doing. So
Mhm.
even though that's important, when something usually goes wrong, it's a much smaller piece, and it's not a culture of an agency or a culture of the occupation.
Right. Um, so do you think that that's true more so in some states versus others?
I think it could be, and I've only worked in Arizona. I've
Mhm.
worked at three, or yeah, three. I get lose track. Three large agencies here in Arizona. And I've run two of them,
Right.
and I can tell you that it just doesn't exist. And I can also tell you that I don't know that there's a police chief or a county sheriff or anyone that is going to cover up or try to make good really bad people that have outperformed the system of good policing. We're not going to protect them because it's bad for everybody. It's bad
Mhm.
for the agency. It's bad. It tarnishes the badge.
Right.
And luckily here in Arizona, we have a great relationship with the Arizona community.
Mhm.
I think you've seen it strained in the East Valley over the Gilbert Goons investigation
Right.
and how that was handled. So that's been strained, and probably rightly so. That those were some transparencies and that didn't happen. There wasn't some communication from the agency.
Mhm.
And those things I think are healthy because it keeps everybody accountable, and we all need to have someone make sure we're doing things the right way.
Right. So for people who aren't as familiar with that situation, can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Gilbert Goons, it's Gilbert, Arizona, and it's kind of Gilbert, Arizona, Chandler, Arizona, and Santan Valley, Arizona. There was a group of current or former young men from these high schools that were victimizing uh, other kids just for the sake of victimizing. They're bullies.
Mhm.
It was just a gang of bullies, and they were beating kids up, taking their lunch money, doing they're just a bunch of jerks.
Right.
And they happened to target a kid who they didn't like. Another kid was there, and that kid was literally beaten to death by the goons,
Mhm.
and that's what sparked this whole outrage. But Gilbert PD, by public opinion, and again, I believe probably rightly so, was not communicated with the community, and the chief didn't come out quickly enough about what was going on.
Mhm.
And I think they've been trying to make up ground on that, but
Mhm.
those are hard things to overcome.
Right. So typically between the different counties and things like that, is there a lot of cooperation?
In Arizona, there is
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
And when I was the DPS director running the state, what basically is the state police, um, we had positive relationships with the county sheriffs, with the cities. We and in Arizona, we're not a true state police department where we have overreaching authority over everything.
Mhm.
We are everybody's. We handle the highway patrol, state gang enforcement. We had the Arizona Border Strike Force, state lab service. We did all of those things, but if we did a statewide investigation, it was at the request of a chief or a sheriff. If they would call us and say, "Hey, will you come help us with this issue?" And I'm
Mhm.
going to sneeze. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Apologize.
We can edit that out.
Okay, good. Can you edit that out for me? Thank you.
There you
Yeah, so they would literally call me, the chief or the sheriff, and say, "Hey, we have a shooting, we have an issue. Maybe they needed our SWAT team,
go.
and
Mhm.
say we have something going on. We need your help." So we didn't go just take it over. We came when people asked.
Mhm. Um,
And if I can explain something about
yeah,
policing,
by all
maybe just for
means.
the audience, just because I don't think people really understand.
Mhm.
If if you're a police officer, if somebody calls you officer,
Mhm.
most likely you are a law enforcement official for an incorporated city or town.
Mhm.
So the city of Phoenix, the city of Glendale, the city of Mesa, those are police officers. If somebody calls you deputy, you are normally part of a sheriff's operation, and the sheriff. There's 15 counties in Arizona,
Mhm.
and the county I'm running for the Maricopa County Sheriff, which is the fourth largest county in the nation, one of the most populous counties in the nation. There's 4.5, 4.7 million people here. But
Mhm.
if they call you deputy, your primary responsibility of enforcement is those unincorporated areas of the same county that cities are in. So Phoenix has Phoenix PD, and Glendale has Glendale PD, and Mesa has Mesa PD. Well, outside the unincorporated areas, that is what the sheriff is in charge of. And then if
Okay.
somebody calls you a trooper, you're normally in work for a state agency. You have state investigations, state SWAT service, state highway patrol.
Mhm.
You're a trooper. And then the final kind of designation that you hear a lot is agent. And if somebody calls you an agent, you're normally part of a federal agency.
Right.
You work for the FBI, you work for the Department of Homeland Security, you're drug enforcement agent. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how those titles work.
Right. So typically, do you have a lot of interaction with those other agencies, or is it only like in really specific events?
It's almost day to day
Is
because
it?
of the complexity of investigations. Yeah,
Okay.
especially running as a colonel for the Arizona Department of Public Safety, we touched everybody all the time because
Mhm.
state highways and state interstates run through all of these cities. So
Right.
we're there. Um, there's always some complex issue that requires extra staffing that they need help with. It's really day to day,
Mhm.
and even like the sheriff's department, Maricopa County Sheriff, at the time when I started the Arizona Border Strike Force, and we were building that to backstop the border sheriffs and to backstop Customs and Border Protection. The governor literally went to Maricopa County and said, "Hey, we give you a lot of money each year for your enforcement programs," and asked Joe Arpaio to give us back a $500,000 that we could give actually to Cochise County
Mhm.
to help build out the Arizona Border Strike Force. So there's a ton of cooperation in Arizona law
Right.
enforcement, and we work with our federal partners just as well and tribal partners.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So Arpaio is one of those people that, like, when I moved to Arizona, I heard a number of things about him, and there are some people that really like him, some people really didn't.
He's a
It seemed,
polarizing
yeah.
figure.
Um, so where did he end up, kind of in the scheme of things?
So he came from DEA.
Mhm.
I think he was actually the special agent in charge here in Arizona when he retired and decided to run for sheriff back in the 80s. Um, and he was longest sitting sheriff that Maricopa County's ever had. I think like right around 25 years.
Hmm.
I think Joe's pluses were that he was real tough on crime, and he had the tent city and the vacancy sign trying to dissuade people from committing crimes.
Hmm.
And he was a good law enforcement partner when we needed help. I just think at some point things changed, and the voters decided that they wanted another face in that seat. So
Right.
that's what happened.
I gotcha. Do you feel like there's that sort of tension now that you're running for that position, or is it
There's
not?
there's no tension on my part, and I think when Paul Penzone decided to leave with a year left in his term,
Hmm.
I think there was some unrest, and I still think there's unrest in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Uh, his number two, his chief deputy, changed parties. He was a Republican and changed parties to be a Democrat, so the county board of supervisors could
Hmm.
appoint him to run. But Paul and I've known Paul for, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. He came from Phoenix PD also.
Hmm.
We have different leadership styles, different management styles. I think we have different skill sets. But I think Paul did, the best that Paul could do to get things moving. But the
Hmm.
DOJ is still there. They've been there for 10 years.
Hmm.
There's still a hiring problem. There's still a retention problem. And even the jailers, the correctional officers that are there, they're short 600, people in staffing. And part of that is pay. I think part of it is that they took them out of the pension system. So there's just some things that have to be addressed and overcome to get everything moving in the right direction
Hmm.
again.
Most of that, at least on the correction side, has to do with the governor and the director, though, as far as dictating what they can or can't do that way. Or
Well, the governor and director is state corrections. So this
okay,
is this is the county
okay.
jail. So this is run by the sheriff, and it's funded by the county board of supervisors. And again, just for the audience's thought process, if you go to jail, you're either there for you've been assigned a sentence that's less than 1 year,
Hmm.
or you're awaiting going to court, or you're awaiting to go to prison. People who are in a state correctional facility, a prison,
Hmm.
they're there for more than 1 year. And then if you're in a federal facility, it's because you committed a federal crime.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Um, so taking on that role of being the sheriff seems like a pretty big responsibility. Does it seem like it's bigger task than what you did previously?
Oh no, not at all.
Okay.
We were had the entire state. I mean, we my office was in Central Phoenix, but the Grand Canyon was in our area of responsibility.
Okay.
So we have the entire state. We have we had troopers in all 15 counties. And DPS was a very complex entity in itself. About a total of about 22, maybe 2,400 total employees.
Hmm.
But again, it was the Highway Patrol, state gangs, the Border Strike Force, state SWAT response, state laboratory service, state
Hmm.
radio, state education and training, um, and the Arizona Counterterrorism Center,
Hmm.
and then a lot of licensing from school bus to tow trucks to teacher certificate. We did
Right.
all the licensing as well. So it was a very complex organization, a lot of moving parts. And because the state was so big, getting out and touching everybody and letting them know what you're doing was
Hmm.
challenging. So the county's 4,500 square miles. It's the biggest county in the state, but the only major difference, other than the scope of what we do, I guess I should say the scale of what we do, is the fact that it has a jail, and the state Department of Public Safety didn't run the prison system. That's run by the corrections director.
I got you. So, with the border being open the way that it has been for the last few years and the number of illegals that are coming into this country, like how does that impact kind of the departments and what they do or how they manage those things?
So I'll start this off with this thought, and I
Hmm.
would tell this to anybody that's listening or anybody you ever meet in a bar or at a restaurant and you have this conversation.
Right?
If somebody took you and dropped you in a place that you'd never been,
Hmm.
you don't have any family, you don't have friends, you don't have a car, you don't have a job. Um, if you, so you're just been dropped in some place you've never been, your the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-survival, self-preservation.
Hmm.
What are you going to do? Well, you're going to find a way to eat. You're going to
Hmm.
find a place to sleep. You're going to, if you don't have money or a job, you're going to find a way to take the things that you need
mhm,
for daily, habits. So what I'm telling you is that all these people that come into the country that didn't get a Joe Biden credit card and cell phone, uh, they commit petty crimes, they commit trespassing, burglary. Um, they they do what they have to do to survive. And again, it's
mhm,
human nature. I don't blame them for that. What I blame them for is that you snuck into the country, you didn't come in here the wrong way.
mhm,
To me, the open border thing, it's not about racism, it's not about separatism, it's not about elitism. There's 6 international ports of entry on the southwest border in Arizona. If you want to come to this country and you want to be part of the fabric of America,
mhm.
and you want to become an American, come to the door, use the door, and come in the front door and let us know who you are and why you're here.
Right,
So that's my thought of it. I just think that the first thing that you do to get into America shouldn't be illegally crossing the border. The
right.
first thing you do here shouldn't be committing a crime. So
Mhm,
all of those agencies, whether the 4 border county sheriffs or the communities that are part of those counties, the immigration overwhelms social services. It overwhelms the school system because schools will educate anybody that walks through the door. It Health services, hospitals, all of those things get overwhelmed because they're not built for the capacity of allowing an extra 10 million people in over 3 years into this country. I
right,
mean, that's not the way. I mean, a country without a fence is not a country. A
mhm,
country without borders is not a country.
right,
And there's no other country in the world that would let this happen. And I think it's most, vividly illustrated in Gaza now. You have this war going on in Gaza, and the Palestinian people are suffering because of the war. They're suffering because of what Hamas did in Israel. But the Egyptians, who have the south border of Gaza, they don't let anybody into Egypt.
mhm,
And it's not that they want to see Palestinians die or they want to that they're heartless. Is that they don't want to let people into their country that they don't know who they are,
right.
and so thousands of people are dying because they won't open the border. That's how sacred border security is, and our president doesn't see it that way.
Right. So, and I'll ask you this question. Why would they, what possible reason could there be for them to allow that to happen, for it just to have an open door like that?
Man, you sound like me because I have asked that question 100 times, and one of my thoughts is I wish the president would stand up at the lectern
Hmm.
and say, here's why I did this. And so I would understand too, because
Right.
there has to be some rationale in his mind. And now you can go with what people say that he's letting all these people in because he wants to be able to make sure people can vote with no ID. And these will be the difference makers for his next presidential run. Um, uh, Again, is there money in it for somebody? I don't know the answer because it's nonsensical to me that we do it.
Right.
And I think what people need to come to terms with is that this is going to end badly for this country.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's going to be the 500,000 Chinese that came in and we don't know who are spies and who aren't and what they're
Hmm.
going to do. I don't know if it's the people coming from the Arabian Peninsula that are going to come in and start terrorism. Uh, I don't know what it is, but something bad's going to happen. If not some things bad going to happen, many things,
Hmm.
and we're going to pay for this.
Yeah.
It's just that simple, and it's going to kill Americans.
That's what worries me the most, is just that there's too much potential for really negative things to happen.
Well, and if you're from a country in the Arabian Peninsula or elsewhere that are anti-American values, anti-democracy,
Hmm.
imagine if you could get a whole bunch of people into the country, and what if you just want to try to destroy the American economy, which is kind of what they tried to do with the 9/11.
Hmm.
But and I'm not trying to give people ideas of terrorism, for goodness sakes, but imagine if at 100 Costco's across the country
Hmm.
on Sunday morning, whatever this Sunday coming up is, what is that, May 12th? May 12th, Sunday morning, Costco opened, and at 100 Costco's across the country, gunmen walked in and started killing people in Costco.
Hmm.
Imagine what that would do. Or they walked into a grade school and started to kill young American kids. Whatever it is that you can think in your mind, some horrible thing you saw in a movie or you read in a book, all of those things are possible, and
Hmm.
they will tear at the fabric of this country,
Right.
and they will tear at the heartstrings of Americans, parents and family members. All the things that we worry about as parents, kids going to school, kids driving on the highway, the legalization of drugs, all those things that worry us. Now you're going to compound that by putting 10 million people in the country that you don't know
Hmm.
who they are.
Right. I'm sure you're familiar with Jack Carr, the author.
Yeah.
So like I've listened to his podcast for a while, and there's a question, or not so much a question, but there's a thought that he's expressed of, if you were one of these countries that are potentially our enemies, right? And you're sitting back and you're watching like how we respond to all these different things. Like, okay, what was the response to 9/11? Yeah, that was its own thing. And then, when COVID happened, it's like, what happened there? Like when you have all these protests and the BLM riots and all these other things, it's like, if you're just sitting back and you're waiting to see how we deal with all those things and use that as a almost like its own sort of training
It's a
about,
roadmap,
yeah, it's like, how do you best defeat us? Because 9/11 wasn't it. That was the opposite of what they wanted.
right? It was a president at the time that wasn't going to tolerate it, and
Hmm.
and he took that opportunity to rally America against the enemy. This president doesn't want to do that. You know, it and it's in every piece of what we see, and it's simple things that, and again, I think all of us as Americans, we need to remember to be critical thinkers. But let's say that you're a person that really believes in climate change, and it doesn't matter what I think. I'm running for county sheriff. Climate change is not in my area of responsibility. But let's just say
Right.
that you're a climate change guy or gal. Um, and you think that it's great that America now has quit producing its own oil, and it's okay that gas is, $4.50 a gallon or whatever it is. But the president says, "Hey, we're going to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. We're going to cut down on fracking. We're going to issue less permits for drilling and for oil. We're going to shut down reserves of other critical chemicals for development in America. But then we're going to call people who may or may not even be our friends and ask them to produce more oil and sell us more of those chemicals
Hmm.
or different things that we need for batteries or other infrastructure. So we're not burning any less oil. We're just paying more for it. And we're buying it from somebody who's probably not even friendly to the US."
Right.
And I'm like, what sense does that make? And what was the purpose of that? Is if your green agenda, I mean, because you can quit selling cars that burn gas, but they still have tires and seats and plastic components. And I mean, everything in this office is made out of oil. There's oil in
Right.
everything.
Right.
So to say, well, we're just going to quit making it here so we can pay more for it somewhere else, the whole thing is nonsensical.
Hmm.
I mean, why wouldn't we be self-sufficient? Why would you get rid of our critical oil reserves, our national oil reserves? Why would you sell that off to the companies to save Americans 4 cents on gas for about 3 months? I
Right.
mean, that's the whole thing is insane.
Right. I
And I know
remember.
this is way outside my area of responsibility, but it just makes you wonder.
Yeah. It, it, there's just so many questions that I don't feel like they ever really get answered. Right. Um, it isn't just the border, and there's so many other things that are going on. It's like we have become our own worst enemies, right? And I think that I'll use racism as an example. I believe that most of the racism, like a good probably 90% or more of racism, only still exists as a political tool. If the politicians couldn't figure out a way to like divide people and use that to encourage people to vote or think differently about whatever, there probably wouldn't be nearly, if any, racism really left in this country. You know?
I think you're right. And but there are racists in the country. There are people who hate. I think who would have thought rich white kids would become Hamas sympathizers and start
Hmm.
destroying their universities and harassing Jewish students? I mean,
Right.
um, I wrote a tweet the other day talking about that. I'm like, what what have the Jewish people ever done to anybody unprovoked? I
Hmm.
mean, they're peaceful people looking for a nation to live in and place to call home. I mean, the Jewish people, the Israelis, didn't start this conflict.
Right.
Um, but but again, it's a great way to divide people and get people mad at each other and
Hmm.
to ensure there's hate in our nation. And there's no room for hate. I mean, and it's funny because hate's learned because little kids, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your handicap is, what color your eyes, what color your hair. All kids just get along. Kids just all sit and play.
Right.
They learn hate from their parents. They learn hate from the media. They learn hate elsewhere because if you put them all in the same schoolyard, they don't care. They're just going to
Right.
play.
Yeah. Kids have a pretty simple criteria. It's like we're the same size. We can be friends.
That's about it.
You know.
And it's hard to watch sometimes.
Mhm.
It's it, there's so there's so many good people on the planet that get overwhelmed by just these outside influences. And
Mhm.
I would still tell you that I think the cell phone is probably one of the most helpful and incredible devices we've ever had brought into our lifetimes.
Mhm.
But it's also just destroyed kids in the sense that, they want to make sure they have a number of followers and they want to send
Right.
pictures of their food and they want to synthesize their photographs so they look, um, um, blemish free. I don't know. It's just like,
Right.
when we were kids growing up, it's like, no, whatever it was, we just who we were.
There was no photo editing.
I always tell my kids, look, if I ever start sending you pictures of my food, I've gone mad. Stop and make sure you make sure you have me hospitalized because something's gone wrong.
Right. Yeah. Things have changed a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
just in our lifetime. So, eh, I know that. Taking on the task of like running for an office, you mentioned this before. It's kind of a big deal. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of, uh, you know, um, what's the word? Uh, when you're trying to raise money and that sort of thing, campaigning, just
Yeah.
in general.
So I've never campaigned, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious. When I joined the Phoenix Police Department when I was 21 years old, I filled out an application, went through some interviews, and got the job. And it wasn't even a competition. It was, are you fit? Are you a good candidate? And you get the job. When I became the chief of police for Mesa, Arizona, it was some level of a meritocracy. It was some sort of who's the most qualified. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, there's three or four of us that are the final candidates, and we're all qualified. And
Mhm.
the city manager and the mayor, the council, they pick the person that they're most likely to feel comfortable with that they can work with. So some of that meritocracy goes out the window.
Mhm.
Um, and when I ran the state, that was absolutely it was much different. I got a call from the governor's staff. I met with the governor. Next thing you know, I was DPS director, and it was an appointment to run for county sheriff, which makes less money than all those other jobs. I might add, it's the worst. It's the worst paying job that I've had
Right.
in a number of decades.
Mhm.
Um, but it's if to run for office is way more difficult than you might imagine
Mhm.
because first off, there's other people that are running, and other Republicans are running for the same seat. There's three of us left in the hunt. Um, you don't know what they're going to do or not do. So, to me, I've made a commitment myself. Don't disparage your opponents. Stay focused on what you bring to the job.
Mhm.
My pedigree outpaces everybody else's in the race.
Mhm.
I mean, on either side of the ticket, I'm the only one that's successfully run major police organizations at the top of the food chain.
Right.
Um, but I had to hire a guy to manage campaign contributions. So we have a treasurer. I had to hire a campaign consultant to oversee to make sure we're not stepping on any landmines and that everything's getting done.
Right.
I just hired a company to do media, to put out short videos on TikTok and Instagram and
Mhm.
run advertisements and put out things on for Google. So and then we had to raise money to get signatures.
Mhm.
I had to get 4,400 valid signatures to be put on the ballot as a Republican. So we did that, and we had to have people go out and help us gather signatures because you can't do it alone. Had to hire a lawyer to make sure you don't violate campaign laws. So you have to
Right.
raise money for all this, and now I call people to donate, and I ask them to go to the website and make a donation so we can raise money to pay for all these things we do because the last thing you want to do is go broke running for a job that doesn't pay well.
Right.
And I ask myself other questions. There's some of these very large donors. I mean, I know the good thing is that running for county sheriff, I know what's in it for them because
Mhm.
most of these big donors are business people.
Hmm.
And they don't want Maricopa County to become Seattle or Portland or,
Right.
San Francisco.
Hmm.
So for them to have a strong county sheriff and to have
Hmm.
a strong county attorney is a big deal. I talk to people at Target and at uh, what's it gas station, not Circle K, but what is it? QT. There it is.
There
Jeez.
you go.
And they're like, if you guys get a liberal sheriff or a more liberal sheriff or a liberal county attorney, they're not going to prosecute people for theft and things. They're packing up and leaving town.
Okay.
I mean, they're like, we want nothing to do with that,
Right.
which is what's happened in San Francisco.
Hmm.
CVS is gone, Walgreens is gone, the high end retailers are gone because you can walk into a store in San Francisco and steal up to $950 worth of merchandise and not be prosecuted. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know whose idea that was, whoever thought it was a great idea,
Hmm.
but it's insane. And we're going to defund the police. Well, if you want to know what happens when there's no police around,
Hmm.
what happens to a community, and I don't, everyone probably has their own personal percentage. I'm just going to tell you that let's just say that 20% of the population are people that will take advantage of a situation.
Hmm.
Look at what happened during well, you could use Katrina if that's too long ago. Look at any natural disaster. When there's a
Right.
natural disaster and public safety, police and fire are tied up saving lives and blocking off roads and getting people out of crisis, the looters come out, they break in, they steal all all the shoes at the Nike store, they
Hmm.
break into the mall. Look what happened during the BLM riots. They broke
Right.
into Scottsdale Fashion Square and started bashing windows and taking stuff because the police were busy doing other things.
Hmm.
So that's what happens when there's no police. If you would never get an Amazon package or a pizza at your house ever again if there were no cops. You would go to Amazon and you would order and you would have to drive to the distribution center
Right.
and pick it up and then hope somebody didn't stop you on your way home and break your window out and take your stuff, which
Yeah.
is what they do in San Francisco. You leave anything in your car, they bash your window out, they take what's in your car, and they go about their business. So that's what happens when there's no cops. And it's
Right.
going to take San Francisco a decade, if not longer, to get back into order.
Yeah.
So the donors that are helping me. They know that I am a conservative police executive
Hmm.
who understands how to run a department, understands how to coalesce disparate populations and galvanize them to common goals. They know I have a deep bench. They know that I will work with other police departments and other government entities to keep Maricopa County safe.
Hmm.
Um, the governor's not going to keep you safe. She dismantled the Arizona Border Strike Force when she got there. She
Hmm.
defunded parts of DPS. I heard her this morning at a memorial talking about bringing drugs into Arizona and how the troopers do that. But she quit paying for a number of the canines we did for interdiction, quit paying for troopers that did that. We were backstopping what went on. So she's not going to stand in the gap.
Hmm.
The city manager for the city of Phoenix, Kate Gallego, she's not going to stand in the gap. She doesn't like the cops. She doesn't support the police department.
Hmm.
They had people in the council wearing BLM shirts to council and defund the police shirts to council. How does that make the police chief and the cops feel?
Right.
And I would tell you this, and you, if you think about this critically, I'm not sure there's many people that would think that I'm wrong. But if somebody gave you, if they came to you and said, "Hey, Rico, look, we just got this new piece of land, and we're going to give it to you to govern. It's governance by Rico, and you get to decide how you build out the governance. And I don't care if it's a city, it's a county, it's a state, or it's a nation.
Hmm.
The first thing that you do is you build in public safety because without public safety, there's no economic development, there's no tourism, there's no education facilities, there's no growth. Nobody wants to be and live in a place, i.e., Oakland, where there's no public safety. I mean,
Right.
Oakland has been, and I mean, they've been leaving that place forever. I'm surprised there's anybody left. And probably the people that are left are either been there their whole lives or are just never going to leave or can't afford to go.
Right.
But you have to have public safety. I
Hmm.
mean, it's just that, and then after that, you need a fire department to provide you emergency medical care and to put out fires.
Right.
It's just simple.
Yeah. It never ceases to amaze me the people that are calling out for like defunding the police. At the very first sign of trouble, the first people they call is always police. And I've just never understood that. It's like you're saying you don't need it until you absolutely do, and then you have no qualms asking for that help again, you know?
And these government officials that say that they want to defund the police or they don't support police, they live in gated communities, they live in secured high-rise buildings, they live behind fence, they live with dog, they live in a place where they don't leave their doors unlocked because they think things are going to happen. If you really think the world's full of good people, leave your garage open for about 2 weeks and see what's still left in your garage 2 weeks later.
Right.
And these are people you live with or your neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, you locks keep honest people honest, laws keep honest people doing the right things.
Right.
That's what the rule of law is about. It keeps honest people honest. And you talk about people who want to defund and they call the police, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about, especially when I go to universities and talk to
Hmm.
kids in school. Is the coolest thing about being a cop. We're one of two jobs left in the entire world
Hmm.
that when you call, and it's police officers and it's firefighters, when you pick up the phone and dial 911, there's only two things that we want to know. Where are you and what do you need? And if you live in an urban environment, we'll be there in 4 minutes. We don't ask who you love. We don't ask who you're married to. We don't care what color you are. We don't care who you pray to. We don't care if you have a credit card. Where are you and what do you need? We're on our way. And
Right.
that's a great thing to be able to think about is, wow, we help people who need help. We protect people who can't protect themselves. In fact, we protect people who can protect themselves that just don't want to do that piece of it.
Right.
Because look, policing is a tough job.
Hmm.
It's the only occupation in the world where your friends get murdered at work. Maybe other than the military, but the military is a different kind of a calling.
Hmm.
But your friends get murdered at work, and we tell you to go back to work, get the job done. I know. I mean, when my roommate got killed back in 1990, it was one of the worst days of my life, and I was back working a week later. I mean,
Hmm.
and he was my best friend. So
Right.
anyway, it's a it's a very complicated job.
Yeah. It seems like it's a hard enough job all on its own without all of the added pressure of the public opinion trying to tell you that you're doing it wrong.
And if you believe that to be true, I completely agree. But I honestly believe that the majority of public opinion is very pro law enforcement and pro police.
Hmm.
It's almost just like everything else in this country. It's that small vocal minority that makes it bad for everybody.
Right.
But uh, I don't know that I've ever sat in a room anywhere or gone to a dinner or a gathering where there was people saying how horrible the police were.
Right.
Most of them are saying, yeah, I got a ticket I didn't like, or, but normally people are supportive of police and know the benefits that good law enforcement brings them.
Hmm.
So again, I don't buy off. I know the media loves to do it. I know they love to write articles and put these provocative headlines. And I don't know to what end to be. It goes back to the same thing as why do you leave the border?
Hmm.
To what end do you want to villainize police when, at the end of the day, when your daughter leaves the house to go to prom for her first time, you
Yeah.
want to know that there's state troopers out there keeping the highway safe. You want to know that there's officers or deputies at the
Hmm.
facility where the prom is to make sure troublemakers don't come in. So and those are the media people or those are your politicians. They all want to know their kids are safe. You want to destroy the Arizona Border Strike Force that's interdicting drugs and human trafficking. But on the other hand, you don't want to find methamphetamine or fentanyl in your kid's sock drawer, or worst case scenario, find your kid purple laying on the floor because they just overdosed and you didn't know why it was so quiet upstairs and they're
Right.
gone. So I don't know to what end they do those things because we all want our kids safe. We
Hmm.
all want our families safe. We all want to recreate and pray and shop and do
Hmm.
whatever it is we want to do and know that we're not going to be a victim of crime.
Yeah. I think on a base level, that's what everybody wants. They want to be able just to go through their lives and not be harassed by outside things
Yeah.
and just do what they need to do, you know? Um, I,
Freedom isn't free.
yeah,
And
exactly.
and these kids that are supporting Hamas, they wouldn't be supporting Hamas if they had to live under Hamas rule,
Right.
and they have no idea what it's like. I've been to Israel twice, and the scariest place I have ever been in my whole life was when we went into the West Bank and we went to go to Bethlehem, where uh, you know Jesus was born and the manger sat. and there was so much propaganda in the West Bank, in and out, coming in and out by bus. And I was there with a law enforcement group through the Anti-Defamation League. I really thought, this may not end well. It was just a scary place, a
Right.
very, very critical regime of American influence.
Mm. Yeah. And now the president wants to bring those people here.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, that's another thing that just absolutely baffles me. Like, what possible good could come of that?
No,
Mm.
eradicate Hamas, either help them, support them, but let the Palestinian people live free, and
Mhm.
they talk about, well, there can't be a two-state solution. Well, the Israelis are comfortable with a two-state solution. They want those people to be safe.
Mhm.
It's not them that are keeping that from happening, but
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, it's all crazy to me. But but look at you and I. We're
Yeah.
born here. We're Americans. How
Right.
lucky are we? We could have been born in any dirt hole anywhere in the world,
Mhm.
and we're so privileged to be here and to not act privileged and to not be respectful of that privilege that we have, that we were born in America. Again, I mean, I look at these kids starving in Sudan. You look at all I mean, this is way off the law enforcement thing, but you see all the tragedy across the globe and you realize how lucky you are to be here. And
Mhm.
then there's people here that don't respect that good fortune.
Mhm.
It's crazy.
It is. Like I said, the world has changed a lot since we were kids.
Yeah.
Um, so when is the actual election coming up?
So the primary election is July 30th. So if you uh, let's just say you like Frank Milstead, I'm your flavor, and you're like, that's the guy I want.
Right.
Uh, if you're a Republican or an independent, you can, and you live in Maricopa County,
Hmm.
on your ballot when you receive it, or when you go to your polling place, whether you're an early ballot voter, or you're someone who likes to go to the polls, um, I will be on your ballot.
Hmm.
Maricopa County resident, Republican, Independent. If you're a Democrat, only the Democratic candidates will be on there. And anyway, that first primary election is July 30th.
Okay.
Early ballots will drop July 3rd. And if I win the primary, then we have another few months to campaign in support of my Republican, nomination to be in the general election, which is November 5th.
Gotcha.
And I'll
So,
run. It'll be one on one against whoever wins the Democratic side of it.
right. Is there any like, I mean, you kind of covered a lot of different things, but is there anything that you would say is kind of like your main thing that you want to be able to achieve? Like,
Yeah, there is. The Department of Justice came into, and there's a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, that governs what the department can and can't do, and how the department will and will not act, and things they will and will not enforce.
hmm.
It's been going on for 10 years. It costs Maricopa County taxpayers about $40 million a year.
Hmm.
There's a federal monitor, there's a federal judge, there's other people that help them out. My first priority is to figure out what it is they want or haven't had, what pushback, what I basically, in short terms, what are they mad about? What do
Right.
they think is wrong?
Okay.
And then to build a team to solve that problem.
Hmm.
Whether I agree or disagree with its validity is of really no concern of mine right now.
Hmm.
It's how do we fix it? How do we use ration and logic uh, uh, to resolve whatever that issue is, so we can get back to hiring people, retaining people, buying new equipment, updating facilities, and doing all of the things that build morale and build pride in the organization.
Hmm.
So, if you run a police department, you can spend all the money you want on recruiting, but if the cops that work for you hate working there,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to hire very many people.
Right.
You're the best recruiters in the world are other deputies. And
Hmm.
if some young kid comes up to him, deputy says, "Oh, I just want to be a deputy sheriff," and the guy goes, "Oh, you don't want to work here. This
Yeah.
place is crazy." Well, you're not going to get still get some of them because they just want to be deputies, but you're
Right.
not going to get all of them.
No.
But it's building that pride back in the organization and making
Hmm.
sure they're respected. But that has to happen. And then there's 600 vacancies in the correctional staff at the jail.
Hmm.
There's 4 jails, and they're down 600 positions. That's unsafe for the inmates. That's really unsafe for the correctional officers. It's not good for the taxpayers because it's going to bring up, it's going to bring up lawsuits
Hmm.
and other things because there's if you either were way overstaffed or you're so far understaffed that you're not doing all the things you need to do.
Right.
So let's figure that out and fix that. Right now, about 20% of the people that are in the county jail have a bond that's less than $1,000. So
Okay.
you're giving them three squares a day, clothing them, housing them, and securing them, and they owe the county less than $1,000. So 20% of 6,000 people
Yeah.
so what can you do to fix that? And to me, the solution is you bring back the chain gang and you let them clean highways for $10 an hour. And people always thought that that was like cruel and unusual punishment.
Hmm.
If you talk to inmates that were on the chain gang, they were so glad to be outside the facility and just doing something
Hmm.
constructive. To pay them 10 or $15 an hour towards their $1,000 bond.
Hmm.
Let them, the inside of the jails, they tell me, are horrific right now because they don't have enough staff. Well, build cleaning crews, build
Right.
crews where you can let the inmates go in and clean the jails and resurrect and fix things
Hmm.
and pay them so you can get them out. And it almost gives them a sense of responsibility, a sense of hope. You end up with kind of a warm release where instead of just sitting around doing nothing all day, they've been doing something constructive,
Hmm.
and then help them go out and find a job and get, have a system where if they need medical support for their addiction, they need a new driver's license. They need a food handler's card
Hmm.
to go and work in a restaurant, whatever that is. Let's figure out how to get those people moving in the right direction so they don't recidivate, and we don't have to house them in the county jail.
Right.
So those are some of the things that I think are important. But the that piece of public trust and morale in the agency is paramount.
I would strongly agree with that.
Yeah,
Um,
because you should love what you do. You should love where you work.
right.
When I was a DPS director, we'd go out to these what we called 103s, and basically they're just substations. We had about 17 different stations across the state where men and women went to work.
Hmm.
And I would go out and see some of these places, and they were dilapidated. They haven't been upkept. They were mobile homes with the floor coming out of them. I mean, my job as the leader of the organization is to go and lobby the legislature and the executive, the governor, for money to rebuild. I mean, you shouldn't have to go to some dilapidated place to go to work that's been
Right.
there since 1963 that nobody's ever taken care of.
Right.
So those are all things that's got to be done.
Sounds like an excellent plan. Also sounds like you got a lot of work to do.
Well, it is a lot of work to do, and people ask me all the time, "Why are you doing this?" Well,
Hmm.
it's simple to me. It needs to be done,
Yeah.
and I'm actually good at it. I've been very successful leading large police agencies.
Hmm.
And if you need to change the culture of a police agency, and I'll tell you, Mesa took about a year to change the culture and to calm things down. The guy that was before me was a guy named George Gascon. George came from LAPD, walked into the department, had all kinds of new ideas and things he wanted to do. He stayed about 2.5 years, but he literally shook the department up like a snow globe and set it on the counter and walked out and went to San Francisco to be the chief. Then he became the DA, and now he's like the most ultra liberal DA in LA County, and he doesn't want to put people in jail and doesn't want to prosecute crime. So I actually know the guy, and I don't know what happened to him, but something went wrong. But you change culture in a year. DPS was probably took us more like 2 years.
Hmm.
We had to change a lot of things there. So culture can be changed in a relatively short period of time. And policies, if you have policies that aren't national standard policies, you can implement policy changes in 60, 90 days.
Hmm.
But you have to have a culture that supports the policies that are interacting. Uh, Culture will eat policy for lunch. You have to have good leadership to support the policy that you're putting in
Right.
place. So that's what I bring to the job.
That's excellent. I definitely want to be respectful of your time because I know you have other obligations.
I do.
Um, but I greatly appreciate you being here. If I actually lived in Maricopa County still, I would be voting for you. Absolutely.
Well, you should
Um,
register here at your office.
there you go.
No, I'm just joking. I don't want to buy it. I'm just making a joke. Don't. No, he's
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
But absolutely. I mean, like I said, it was wonderful to have you here. I glad I got to hear more about what you're doing because it's most people will never understand how important that is. They look at law enforcement is just sort of an umbrella. It's they like it or they don't, or they've had bad experiences or not, and they don't think about everything else. One of the biggest things you pointed out is culture. If we can modify the culture and give people a sense of hope and feeling safe again, that's going to go a long ways towards fixing other things in our country.
There's no doubt.
Yeah,
Well, Rico, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm honored to be here. If we win the primary, I'll come back and we'll do a follow up and talk about where we go next.
that would be awesome.
Um, and again, it's been an honor to shake your hand.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you much.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, you can now support the Non-Victim Nation by donating via listener support directly on Spotify. Remember, the story of your life is being written right now, and you are the hero.